Just like that, week 2 of the fantasy season is here. You know exactly what we need to do. We're going to roll through every single game, every single matchup, talk about every single running back, and go over who you should be starting and who you should be sitting in week 2 of the fantasy season. Let's start with Thursday Night Football. We'll have the Commanders traveling to face the Packers, and we're starting with who other than Bill himself, JCM of the Commanders. If you were in on the hype, it paid off in week 1 against the Giants with 14.2 fantasy points, 82 yards on the ground, 8.2 yards per carry, and a tutty. Here in week 2, he will face the Packers, a stiffer run defense than the Giants, but they still allowed a pretty good fantasy day overall to Jahmyr Gibbs and the Lions in week 1. So I think JCM still a very strong start here in week 1. May depend, who else is on your roster, all of that stuff, because he was a later round drafted player, but I feel pretty good if I own JCM, and I will have him in my starting lineup if I don't have better options. I still think Austin Eckler is flexible. I won't call him anything more than that because he has that PPR upside. He did have 3 catches off of 3 targets in this game, 31 receiving yards compared to JCM just having 1 total target. And then I really should have Jeremy McNichols on the screen over Chris Rodriguez because Rodriguez was inactive in week 1 and McNichols was active, but it doesn't really matter. You're sitting either of those guys. Bill, truthers, rejoice. Your week 1 moment was here. And say overall, I feel pretty good about JCM, even on a short week in week 1. But keep in mind, better defense overall this week, I would argue. And it's a short week. Weird things can happen on Thursday Night Football. Then we got Josh Jacobs, who you are starting absolutely no matter what. The Commanders' defense did look very good against the run in week 1, allowing the second fewest fantasy points to the position. At the time I'm recording this, Monday Night Football hasn't been played, so it's not including Vikings or Bears. But either way, they're going to finish the week as a top 5 unit against running backs. Tyrone Tracy, Cam Scatabo were helpless out there, but also the game script, put the Giants in a position where they needed to throw and not run. But it's Josh Jacobs. Don't overthink it. 14 fantasy points in week 1. Did have a touchdown. Yo, and Josh Jacobs, you absolutely need to roll with him every single week. And you know what? I want in on the Bill hype here in week 2. So I'm headed straight to Underdog to take the over on JCM to score a touchdown in week 1. All new users who sign up using promo code THECATCH on Underdog, that link is down below, are going to get a free NFL pick'em to use towards week 2's action. Take that free pick'em, take JCM to score a touchdown against the Packers, and if both of those lines hit, you will automatically double your cash entry on Underdog. Plus, Underdog has a new offer exclusive to all users who sign up using promo code THECATCH. Once you play through $5 on Underdog, you're going to automatically receive $50 in free bonus cash to use towards week 2's action. And all new users to Underdog who sign up using promo code THECATCH, as soon as you make your first deposit, Underdog is going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So make sure you guys sign up using promo code THECATCH on Underdog to take advantage of all of their week 2 exclusive offers. Let's move into Sunday's slate of games, starting with the Giants traveling to face the Cowboys. And like I said, that Giants backfield did nothing whatsoever against the Commanders in week 1. Tyrone Tracy, 5.5 fantasy points. Scattaboo, 2.9 fantasy points. And Devin Singletary didn't even have a single fantasy point. So what do we make of this Giants backfield on the road here against the Dallas Cowboys in week 2? Well, this is a better matchup as the Cowboys basically got shredded by Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts on the ground. But yeah, I mean, where you drafted Tracy or Scattaboo, you don't need to be starting them in week 2, I would hope. So I wouldn't say you have to lose all hope in either of these guys. But the offense looks like it's going to put them in position to need to throw the football on a regular basis. And I mean, I don't really need to discuss this. You just don't need to start Tracy or Scatabo in week 2. I don't think you have to necessarily drop them and completely panic here. There's still some hope left, but week 1 just wasn't very good overall, and I don't really see it getting better even against the Cowboys in week 2. And in terms of the Cowboys running backs, Javonte Williams had himself a day in week 1 against a very good Eagles defense with 20.4 fantasy points, 54 yards on the ground, 3.6 yards per carry, and 2 tutties as well as 2 catches for 10 receiving yards. This week he will get the Giants, who gave up a lot of fantasy points, as we just talked about, finishing 26 against the position in week 1. But what I do worry about Javonte Williams, while I still think he's very startable here in week 2, we had 2 drives that led to very short yardage situations near the goal line, and Javonte Williams punched it in, not taking anything away from him whatsoever, but I do worry to some degree about that in week 2. Like, if we didn't have the touchdowns, what would we really be looking at here? But you can always argue that for any player. So I just don't get crazy here. I mean, there's still a lot of good players that I think you should be starting over Javonte Williams, but he is 100% a viable start option here in week 2. Any other Cowboys running back, we don't even need to discuss. They're not fantasy relevant at this point in the season. Next up, we have the Seahawks traveling to face the Steelers. Maybe 2 of the most frustrating running back rooms when it comes to fantasy. We'll find out as the season progresses. I just have Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet as startable. I just don't know what to make of this split. I mean, Walker was coming back from injury. Like, we knew that. He had 10 total rushing attempts, 3 targets, 3 catches, and Charbonnet had 12 total rushing attempts, including the red zone touchdown, and no volume whatsoever in the passing game. So that's a positive for Kenneth Walker. But then we have the negative of, Charbonnet being used in the goal line situation, and basically an even split when it came to total touches. So I have some concerns here, and I will say the Niners front 7 was a lot better in week 1 than I was maybe anticipating. Robert Saleh making a big change there, and they did bring him some pieces in the offseason too, but they're just bad against the run last year ultimately, right? So we get the Steelers here in week 2, who just got essentially annihilated by Breece Hall and Justin Fields on the ground. So I think that's a good spot, but the split makes it really difficult to call here because we like the system. We like the Clint Kubiak system for running backs, but the offensive line did not look great for the Seahawks in week 1. So startable, but they both hold risk. That risk could certainly pay off. And I just got to leave it at that until further notice. And I hope it gets better for fantasy purposes as the weeks start to progress here. Then we look at the Steelers. Also somewhat frustrating. Jaylen Warren had a good day, had the receiving touchdown, 13.9 fantasy points. I did not have Caleb Johnson as a start anywhere last week, and I hope you didn't start him. But then we also saw 7 carries and 3 catches off of 4 targets go to Kenneth Gainwell in this game, as Caleb Johnson had just 1 rushing attempt for -2 total yards. So I'm not going to buy in on the Kenny Gainwell. I mean, is there a hype train? I don't think there should be, but he did see involvement, right? He also had a fumble in this game too. So, and Caleb Johnson had a fumble on his only touch. So I would say if you own Jaylen Warren, you should be feeling pretty good, but he's just kind of in that startable area. He didn't really do a lot on the ground whatsoever. He just had the receiving touchdown, but if Aaron Rodgers can get the Steelers offense to play how they played in week 1 on a regular basis, then I'd feel good if I own Jaylen Warren. He will get some dump offs and he'll get fantasy production for that reason. But is the ceiling super high? No. So definitely some startable running backs in this matchup, but I'm not feeling a ton of upside here in week 2. Next up, we have the Rams traveling to face the Titans. Kyren Williams, I mean, no matter what you want to say about Kyren Williams, he's still that guy who's going to score a touchdown almost every single week. Pretty good front 7 out of the Texans, and we still got a touchdown out of Kyren Williams. If you own Kyren Williams, that's all you're really hoping for. So, he gets the Titans this week, and this defense looked pretty good in week 1 as well. But ultimately, when we look at week 1 for the Titans, they gave up a big day to J.K. Dobbins on the ground and finished very, very low in terms of fantasy points allowed in terms of rankings, right? 28th against the position on the week so far. So I think that Kyren Williams, a very solid start here in week 1, in week 2. And we don't need to be considering any other running back here on this roster. sure. Now, Tony Pollard, I went back and forth on last week, and ultimately should have stuck with that gut feeling of being worried about him against the Broncos, but I thought that the volume would be there. And he had a decent day, had 18 total touches and a 29 receiving yard stat line there, but he lost a fumble and obviously did not find the end zone. And this Rams defense is looking good right now. So I think he's still startable because, once again, the volume should be there. But ultimately, I just don't feel great if I own Tony Pollard right now, because there's another matchup for Cam Ward in his rookie season where the defense looks really good. And I do worry about Tony Pollard for that reason. I'm going to leave him in the startable category, but he's kind of like in the lower end tier of the startable category. And we really got to cross our fingers to start getting some touchdown production out of Tony Pollard here early in the season. Next up, we have the Bills traveling to face the Jets, and this should be a good one when it comes to fantasy points scored, as the Bills very poor against the run last week, and the Jets bad enough against the run last week. So James Cook, big week 1, 21.2 fantasy points, 44 yards on the ground, a touchdown, 5 catches for 58 receiving yards against the Ravens. I will consider him a must-start running back on the road here against the Jets in week 2. The nice thing was, although the game script, was very in favor of everybody for the Bills, we saw a lot of passing volume out of the Bills in week 1. We saw Josh Allen do his thing, and we still saw James Cook have a big fantasy day. So I still feel very, very good if I own James Cook, who I think was a steal during draft season. And Breece Hall may have been another player who was a huge steal in draft season as well. A lot of concerns around Breece Hall going into this season, but week 1 looked very good. 16.5 fantasy points, 107 yards on the ground with 5.6 yards per carry against the Steelers. And this is a Bills defense that just got absolutely manhandled by Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. So Breece Hall, strong start. He also had 2 catches for 38 receiving yards in week 1. Fire up Breece Hall with confidence. I feel good if I own him. Braylon Allen did have a touchdown, got some involvement, but only 1.5 yards per carry and really just a red zone score. So definitely still a player who I like having on your roster, a good handcuff, but till we see something more here, we can't consider him anything more than a sit here in week 2. Next up, we have the Patriots traveling to face the Dolphins. And let's just start with the Patriots side of things. A good matchup, right? We know that this defense, is looking very, very bad on paper. They were worse against wide receivers than running backs for what it's worth in week 1. But Travion Henderson's just going to kind of live in that startable area. I still think this is his backfield to, no pun intended, run away with. He looked much better than Ramondre Stevenson in week 1, who had just 2.1 yards per carry, and Antonio Gibson had 1 touch in this game. Henderson, 5.4 yards per carry, did not find the end zone, but most importantly, 6 targets, 6 catches, 24 receiving yards, getting that PPR value. This should only grow as the season continues. Good enough matchup here in week 1. He's startable, could be a decent flex option this week. Don't be going crazy here, but this is a player who still holds a lot of upside as the season progresses. When it comes to the Dolphins, there's only one player at any position who I would have any confidence in starting this week, and that's Devon Achane, who still pulled through in week 1 with 16.5 fantasy points, had a receiving touchdown, 20 total receiving yards off of 3 catches, and 55 yards on the ground. Let's just ignore everything else and remind ourselves, when healthy, Devon Achane is a very good fantasy player. He gets the Patriots this week. I'm not scared of this defense really in any way, shape, or form. They were pretty good against the run in week 1, but still not scared here. Achane's a solid start. And like I said, as week 1 started to get closer and closer, Ollie Gordon is just a handcuff. Nothing else. Don't be getting crazy here. Jalen Wright still hurts, so Devon Achane, still a solid start. Henderson, very intriguing start, but he just kind of remains in the startable category here in week 2. Next up, we have the Jaguars traveling to face the Bengals, and on paper, this should be a good matchup for fantasy purposes, and Travis Etienne truthers unite. It's early, but maybe it's truly time for ETN season, as Tank Bigsby saw just 5 carries in this matchup. Bayshaw Tootin had 3 carries, then LaQuint Allen, the rookie out of Syracuse, had 1 carry and 1 target, 1 catch in this game. ETN had 16 total touches, 143 yards, and 8.9 yards per carry, as well as 3 targets, 3 catches, 13 fantasy points, or excuse me, 13 receiving yards. I'm sorry. We knew that the Panthers' run defense was bad, so I mean, there's that aspect, I guess, but if you own ETN, you got to keep rolling with them. Now, he might be like your RB4. You got to kind of consider your situation here when it comes to your roster, but good enough matchup here against the Bengals, who weren't like god-awful or anything in week 1 defensively, but they still gave up a lot of fantasy points to Dylan Sampson. And so I think it's a good spot for Travis Etienne as he does get some involvement in the receiving game, which is how Dylan Sampson got his fantasy points in week 1. So ETN, I feel good about him, but it definitely depends on who you have on your roster. Chase Brown could be the RB1 this season, it feels like, and he came out kind of swinging early, but ultimately didn't come away with a huge fantasy day. The early touchdown, he had 21 rushing attempts, but just 43 yards, 3 targets, 2 catches, 8 receiving yards. But we know it's a good front 7 for the Browns. And the Jags were not very good against the run in week 1, still allowed a big day to Chuba Hubbard. So Samaje Perine saw 2 targets, had 2 catches. Tajay Brooks had no involvement. I mean, it was all Chase Brown in week 1. The volume is still there. There's going to be better days, and it was still a good enough start in week 1. So ETN, Chase Brown, I feel good about both these guys here in week 2. Next up, we have the Niners traveling to face the Saints. And Christian McCaffrey, calf problem, no problem. He was good to go. 23.2 fantasy points. Told you guys in Sunday morning's video, if you own Christian McCaffrey, don't overthink it. He's got to be in your starting lineup, and he gets another very good matchup this week against the Saints. You just allowed a big day to James Conner in week 1. There's no receiving options out of Ricky Pearsall with George Kittle hurt, Jawan Jennings hurt. Christian McCaffrey had 10 targets, 9 catches, 73 receiving yards this past week. He is in line for another big fantasy day. He doesn't even need to score touchdowns to have big fantasy days. He is a solid start here in week 2. And I really liked Alvin Kamara in week 1. Felt like he was being a little bit undervalued going into a matchup against a poor run defense of the Cardinals in week 1, and he had a decent day, 4.9 yards per carry, a touchdown, 2 catches, 45 yards on the ground, and 13.7 fantasy points. But this Niners front 7 looks very improved. They were top 10 against the running back position this past week in terms of fantasy points allowed. I worry a little bit here because, once again, this Spencer Rattler-led offense will have its woes, but Kamara is still a solid start who will get enough usage regardless of what's going on in terms of game script because he gets work in the receiving game or on the ground. So I like Kamara. Don't need to consider anybody else on the Saints roster. So I think we got 2 solid starting running backs in this week 2 matchup. Moving along, we have the Browns traveling to face the Ravens. Dylan Sampson was a player I talked a lot about going into week 1. Came through for you guys. 8 targets, 8 catches, 64 receiving yards. That's all that matters. Wasn't very efficient on the ground, 2.4 yards per carry. But this is what I talked about throughout the course of preparation for week 1. He can be a receiving threat, and he was that. Finished with 17.3 fantasy points. Now, the elephant in the room is that Quentin Junkins is probably going to play in week 2, is at least the report that we're getting, as he missed week 1, signing with the team very late. And that will impact things here, but I think he's just going to take over Jerome Ford's role. I think he could be much more efficient than Jerome Ford, who had 1.3 yards per carry this past week. So I'm not ready to start Quentin Junkins. His first ever NFL start could pay off, but I just don't. What position are you in that you need to start Junkins this week? Just sit back, let it unfold, let it be his first overall start, and go from there. But this is a good matchup. The Ravens allowed a lot of rushing yards to Josh Allen and James Cook in week 1, and they could be another game script here where they need to throw the football that benefits Dylan Sampson. So he's startable, but maybe hold some risk based on what Junkins does or doesn't do. But I'll give the nod to Sampson for now because he at least played in week 1. Then we got Derrick Henry, who is a start. No matter, it doesn't matter. Okay, he could be facing the 1985 Bears you're still starting him, okay? And the Browns, have a good front seven. We're good against the run this past week, 7th against the position and fantasy points allowed to running backs. But Derrick Henry is coming off of a 29.2 fantasy day. Even with that fumble at the end of the game, he was absolutely dominant with 9.3 yards per carry, 2 tutties, a catch, 169 yards on the ground. We don't need to break it down. It doesn't matter what the matchup is. You start Derrick Henry every single week. Next up, we have the Bears traveling to face the Lions. And I do have to record these before Monday Night Football, so don't crucify me in the comments if something crazy happens or if an injury happens. I will have a pinned comment down below for you guys with my thoughts. But I think DeAndre Swift's going to have a decent enough week 1 that he's going to be startable in week 2. Maybe he moves down to the startable category. Maybe we see more volume out of a Roschon Johnson, who's actually going into week 1 banged up, so maybe we don't, or the rookie Kyle Monangai, whatever it may be. I still like Swift enough ultimately that he should be startable in week 2. But yes, Monday Night Football will kind of determine that. So I will let you guys know if my thoughts change in the comments down below. The Lions were pretty good ultimately against the run in week 1, but they still, at the end of the day, allowed enough out of Josh Jacobs that I think Swift will be startable in week 2. And then we got the Lions, who felt very disappointing overall in week 1, and maybe the running back position specifically felt disappointing, but Jahmyr Gibbs still had 15 fantasy points, so try not to overthink it. He had 10 targets, 10 catches, with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams kind of having very down days. So not a big day on the ground for Gibbs, but ultimately he's still a solid start here in week 2, regardless of how the Bears look defensively against the run in week 1. And Monty is still startable. Definitely not a great day in week 1, but he had 8.3 fantasy points, 25 yards on the ground, 4 catches. It was just a bad day for the Lions, and don't get me wrong, that the play calling, the offensive line, there are some things that were worrisome in week 1, but the game script definitely took the running backs out of the game for the most part, outside of the passing game, right? So I think it could be a lot better in week 2. Both these guys still startable, and Jahmyr Gibbs is definitely still in the start category in week 2. J.K. Dobbins, a running back that I showed a lot of faith in moving into week 1, who I really believed would be the starting running back who would see the most volume in week 1, and that's what we got. 14.8 fantasy points, 63 yards on the ground off of 16 rushing attempts and a rushing touchdown, 2 targets, 2 catches. Good day for Dobbins ultimately. But it is worth noting, RJ Harvey didn't look bad. He just had 6 rushing attempts and that was it, but 11.6 yards per carry and 70 total rushing yards for him in week 1. So don't lose faith if you own RJ Harvey necessarily. Looked very explosive. No other running back that we really need to talk about, in my opinion, on this roster, but I got Harvey as a sit. Dobbins, I still think, is going to be startable. The Colts kind of right there, middle of the pack against running backs in week 1, 15th against the position. So listen, we could see some variation week to week with this backfield. I do still believe that, but for now, I think Dobbins is the most startable player on this team at the position. Jonathan Taylor, it wasn't as good as the Colts were in week 1. They were just slinging it with Danny Dimes. So JT finished with 12.8 fantasy points, 71 yards on the ground, 3 catches, 27 receiving yards. I was kind of close to moving him down in the startable category because I don't like this matchup. So please keep that in mind. It may depend on who you have, because this Broncos defense is absolutely legit, and they allowed the fewest fantasy points to running backs in week 1. And it was Cam Ward and Tony Pollard in week 1. How much better is that than Daniel Jones and Jonathan Taylor in week 2? I'm not taking anything away from Daniel Jones, but I just don't know. I don't know. So I think JT's startable, but he's, in terms of running backs in the true start category this week, he is the one I'm the most worried about. But it's still JT at the end of the day, so I'm going to try not overreact, but do not underestimate this Broncos defense, even on the road here against the Colts in week 2. Next up, we have the Panthers traveling to face the Cardinals. I think this is a good matchup overall for both major running backs involved. Let's start with Chuba Hubbard. The Panthers basically had a disastrous day Sunday, but Chuba pulled through. 17.9 fantasy points, 57 yards on the ground, 3 catches, 32 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. So if you own him, good enough matchup. The Cardinals weren't like awful against the run, also weren't great, but Chuba, regardless of the woes with Bryce Young and the rest of this offense, Chuba is going to remain a player who has viable fantasy value every week. So for now, Chuba, I think, is still a solid start. James Conner, a player I liked a lot moving into week 1. Great matchup for him. And he gets another very good matchup against this Panthers run defense that's bottom 12 against the position, at least looking at fantasy points allowed in week 1. So Conner, still a solid start. 4 catches in this game and a receiving touchdown, 39 yards on the ground. That's about it. I mean, I guess with James Conner, we got to mention Trey Benson did see some volume. It basically came out to a 60-40 split. And ultimately, Trey Benson was the leading rusher on the ground here. And, you take away the touchdown from Conner, like how different do things look here? It's worth the argument. Trey Benson is a solid handcuff. Maybe he's becoming more than a handcuff, and we got to monitor this situation as the weeks progress. But I'm just not ready to start Trey Benson until we see him get some actual touchdown usage overall. But he looked good, 8.6 yards per carry compared to James Conner's 3.2 yards per carry. So I know there's going to be a lot of talk about this backfield, and Trey Benson will probably be more highly rostered, sitting at 54% rostered at the moment. But ultimately, for now, I'm just going to stick with James Conner, and I think that Chuba Hubbard is a good start here in week 2. To end the afternoon games, we're going to have the Eagles traveling to face the Chiefs for a Super Bowl rematch. And let's start with none other than Saquon Barkley, who had 18.4 fantasy points in week 1, 60 yards on the ground, 8 touchdown, 4 catches, 24 receiving yards. It almost felt like a down day for Saquon Barkley. That's just how good Barkley is. And also, Jalen Hurts had 2 rushing touchdowns. But yeah, they get the Chiefs this week. The Chiefs' run defense, although the pass defense looked really bad in week 1, the run defense was still top 5. As advertised, as a good run defense. We know that. They did essentially take Saquon Barkley out of that Super Bowl game as well last year. So keep that in mind. But come on, it's Saquon Barkley. You got to start him on a weekly basis. And he takes all the volume here outside of Jalen Hurts at the quarterback position. So it's just Barkley, nobody else to even consider here. And he's a start no matter what. Now, when it comes to the Chiefs running backs, I have a lot of concern. Isaiah Pacheco looked like a ghost in week 1. Kareem Hunt, at the end of the day, had basically the same exact amount of touches on the ground and total targets. It was a stout Chargers run defense, we know that. And this week they get the Eagles, who were surprisingly really bad against the Cowboys in week 1. But how are we going to call this Chiefs backfield on a week-to-week basis? I just want no part of it. I'm not saying you need to drop Pacheco just yet or anything, but he's just not a player who you can even consider starting on a week-to-week basis right now. And, Brashard Smith, Eli Mitchell, no involvement in week 1. It is just Hunt and Pacheco, but literally an exact 50-50 split. 5 touches on the ground for both backs, 3 targets, 2 catches for both backs. Pacheco is the more efficient runner with 5 yards per carry compared to Hunt's 3.2, but I'm just staying clear away until we see something happen on a consistent basis when it comes to the Chiefs running backs. Moving into Sunday Night Football, we're going to have the Falcons traveling to face the Vikings. Bijan Robinson, a start no matter what, every single week. 24.4 fantasy points, had the early long touchdown reception in this game. Ultimately had 6 catches for 100 receiving yards and a touchdown. What I will note is that he only had 12 rushing attempts for 24 rushing yards and 2 yards per carry. But the defensive line in the Bucs looked great. But Tyler Algier had 10 touches in this game, 2.4 yards per carry, 24 yards on the ground for Algier. So this was worrisome to some Bijan Robinson owners out there. But we've seen this before with Tyler Algier getting, volume early in the season and just in general overall. So I wouldn't panic just yet. And I don't think you need to panic necessarily. But Bijan right now, the time I'm recording this before Monday Night Football has been played, he's still the RB2 on the week. So don't freak out here. I know it's frustrating to see Algier get that usage, especially towards the red zone. But Bijan is still a must-start player regardless of matchup. Now, yes, once again, I am recording this before Monday Night Football, so if any major injuries happen here to the Vikings running backs or anything that really changes my mind, it'll be in a pinned comment down below. But for now, until I see what happens tonight, unfortunately, this is one where I do really need to actually watch the game. But Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason are probably just going to be in the startable category once again until I see what this split actually looks like. The Falcons run defense kind of in the middle there, surprisingly okay against Bucky Irving, but he still had a nice day when things were all said and done. So going to depend on the split in Monday Night Football here, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason are going to be somewhat startable in week 2, but once again, just got to see what happens. Does Mason truly get all those goal line touches or not? Does Aaron Jones do enough in the receiving game? We'll find out. I'll leave you guys a pinned comment down below. Moving into Monday Night Football, we're going to have the Buccaneers traveling to face the Texans, the first of 2 Monday Night Football matchups. And in week 1, it was all Bucky Irving. I know it felt like kind of an underwhelming performance, but he got you guys through 14.5 fantasy points. 37 yards on the ground, 4 targets, 4 catches, and that receiving touchdown. So he did enough here. And this wasn't a game script where the Bucs needed to run the football. They needed to throw the football. Unfortunately, Bucky Irving got that involvement. Rashad White was off the injury report. He had just 2 touches and then 1 target, 1 reception. Sean Tucker just 1 touch on the ground. So still all Bucky Irving. The volume is promising, and don't overreact too much to week 1. Bucky Irving is going to remain a must-start player until further notice. This Texans run defense, certainly not bad by any stretch, but ultimately, come on, you got to feel good if you own Bucky Irving at the end of the day. You probably don't feel good if you invested in any Texans running back, though, whether it's Nick Chubb, Woody Marks, Damian Pierce, or for some reason Darway Agumbawale. There's just nobody I would start here. This Bucs run defense looked pretty good in week 1. At the end of the day, they did allow ultimately a lot of fantasy points to Bijan Robinson, but they could have been a lot worse, I think, at the same time. So I'm not going to compare this Texans backfield to Bijan Robinson and say that they could ultimately have similar success, even though the Bucs ranked low, technically speaking, against a run in week 1. So Nick Chubb, Woody Marks, whoever you stashed here, or whatever, hopefully you didn't start any of these guys. They're just going to be sits until further notice. Now, still think the Rams' run defense is better than the Bucs, but come on. I mean, what are we really expecting? I know the Texans are at home here, but so like maybe Nick Chubb can punch one in or something. He did see the most volume. He's the most startable running back here, but I just hope you're not in a position where you truly are having to consider Nick Chubb as your RB2 here in week 2. Let's avoid the Texans running back room as much as we can. Last but not least, to wrap up Monday Night Football, we're going to have the Chargers traveling to face the Raiders, and Omarion Hampton definitely feels like a disappointment in week 1, but don't freak out here, guys. Don't overreact. He still looked very good if you watch this game. He had 15 rushing attempts, 48 yards on the ground, 2 targets, 2 receptions, and the most promising thing was, although Najee Harris is coming off of the bizarre eye stuff and everything, this was almost 100% Omarion Hampton's backfield, as Najee had 1 target, 1 catch, and 1 rushing attempt. All the other volume went to Omarion Hampton, and the Chiefs' run defense is very good. This is a different matchup in week 2 against the Raiders, and the Chargers were dicing it up against the Chiefs' secondary in terms of the passing game in week 1. And the Raiders' run defense wasn't awful necessarily in week 1 against the Patriots, but it's going to be better for Hampton in week 2 and as the weeks start to progress here, even if they get a tough matchup in week 3 against Denver. But Hampton is still startable. It's going to depend on who else you guys have, but Hampton is still a good start in week 2 as we get a good little matchup here with the top 2 rookie running backs. And that brings us to Ashton Jeanty, who kind of quietly had 12 fantasy points, scored a touchdown, didn't really do a ton in this game, only 2 yards per carry against the Patriots. And I will say it's a much tougher matchup this week against a Chargers run defense that allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to running backs in the past week. So bear that in mind. But once again, I think Jeanty is startable. And the problem is you spent early draft capital on an Ashton Jeanty or an Omarion Hampton. So it could depend on who else you have. But I think for the most part, You're kind of riding the wave early in the season with these guys, and things will get better and better as the season progresses and as they see ultimately softer matchups. But Hampton, Genty, I still think are plenty startable here in week 2. And there it is, every single player, every single matchup for the running back position and who you should be starting or sitting as we approach week 2 of the season. Don't forget, guys, if you have any fantasy football questions whatsoever, whatever it is that you guys need to help you moving into week 2 of the season, drop it down below. I will answer every single comment on this video. And while you're down there, it really does help out if you guys hit that subscribe button on the way out. And don't forget, this is all we do here all year long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. So be sure to subscribe on the way out. And when the playlists pop up on the screen, make sure you guys are checking out all of our week 2 videos. We're going to have everything you could possibly need here on the channel to help you dominate week 2 of the season. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.